The first thing Mara Reyes lost was her left hand, and she didn't mourn it for even a second. She was elbow-deep in the guts of an Vethkai atmospheric processor when the pressure seal gave. The sound it made was a wet crack, the kind of noise a joint makes when pushed past the architecture of its design. She felt the heat before the pain, a white column of superheated coolant cycling at pressures that made starship hull plating bow, and then she felt nothing, which was worse. She pulled her arm back and looked at the stump with the same focused attention she gave a schematic with a calculation error. She noted the clean line of the cauterization. She noted the absence of the kind of bleeding that would kill her in the next 3 minutes. She noted that her multi-tool was still clipped to her belt. She finished the repair with her right hand. It took 11 minutes longer than her estimate. She found this mildly irritating. The Vethkai facility supervisor, a being whose species communicated partly through the color shifts of bioluminescent filaments running beneath its skin, turned a deep amber when she walked out of the processor bay. She had learned, in 22 months aboard the station, that amber meant something close to alarm, or awe, or the particular state that existed between those two things when neither one was quite adequate. She'd also learned that the Vethkai had 17 distinct color registers for categories of loss, and not a single one for the concept of acceptable trade-off. That, she had come to understand, was the essential difference between them. You require medical transfer, the supervisor said, through the translation module clipped behind her ear. Its filaments had shifted to a pale, rapid pulse. Distress. The station infirmary. The processor is fixed, Mara said. Bay 12 is back online. You're welcome. She found the infirmary herself. She sat in a white chair and let the Vethkai medic do what it needed to do. She answered the questions she was asked. She signed the forms. And while she waited for the sedation to wear off, she lay on the cot and thought about the hand she'd lost. It was, in purely functional terms, an inferior piece of engineering. She had always known this. She'd known it since she was 8 years old, tearing apart her father's kitchen appliances to understand the motors inside. Not maliciously, but with the same helpless compulsion a musician feels reaching for an instrument. The human hand was a masterpiece of accumulated biological accident. 54 bones, 27 joints. A nervous system so dense and redundant that it would take a textbook to catalog the ways it could fail. It was built by 4 billion years of trial and error was, at its core, an inefficient process. Beautiful, but inefficient. The hand they offered her as a replacement did nothing to improve on this assessment. It was a Vethkai prosthetic. The best model available to non-citizens, the medic assured her, a gesture of considerable goodwill given her station worker status. It was a pale gray shell of biopolymer fitted over a skeletal lattice, with pressure sensors calibrated for a 6-fingered Vethkai grip. It had 4 fingers. It moved with a half-second lag. It could grip up to 40 kilograms. When she tested the fine motor control, pinching, rotating, the small precise movements that separated a good technician from a great one, it performed like a machine built by someone who had read a description of a hand without ever actually seeing one. She wore it for 4 days. She used it to sign discharge forms, carry meal trays, and write a 14-page technical assessment of everything wrong with it. Then she asked for access to the fabrication lab. The Vethkai facility manager, a different one from the supervisor, higher rank, more filament colors she hadn't cataloged yet, took 40 minutes to respond to her request. When it did, the response was a question. What precisely did she intend to fabricate? A better hand, she wrote back. There was a long pause. She imagined, somewhere in the station's administrative network, this message passing from terminal to terminal, gathering the digital equivalent of confused looks. Permission was granted. She suspected this was because none of the administrators believed she could actually do it. She worked for 9 days without sleeping more than 4 hours at a stretch. She ate at her workstation. She drank the bitter Vethkai stimulant compounds that tasted like burnt wire and kept her focused. She pulled apart the prosthetic and rebuilt it from principles. Not Vethkai principles. Those assumed a 6-finger grip, a different center of gravity, a neuromuscular interface protocol written for a nervous system that processed sensation in a frequency band the human brain didn't use. She started over. She wrote her own interface protocol. She designed the skeletal lattice from scratch, scaling the bone load ratios from her own body measurements. She added a haptic layer, so dense it could detect the difference between paper and cloth through a glove. When she attached it, the sensation was extraordinary. Not because it felt like a hand. It didn't. Not exactly. Not at first. There was a week of recalibration, of the brain rewriting its own map of where fingers ended and air began. But by the time that week was done, it felt better than a hand. It was stronger. It was faster. The haptic response was cleaner than biological nerves because it wasn't subject to the noise of pain, fatigue, or temperature. She could feel a wire's gauge through a conduit wall. She could tighten a coupling to within 3 Newton meters of tolerance without a torque gauge. She went back to work in Bay 12 and finished in a third of the estimated time. The facility supervisor's filaments turned a color she had never seen before. She would later learn it was the Vethkai equivalent of reassessment, the particular quality of attention given to something you had filed in one category and must now file in another. She was not prepared for what came next. The request came from the station's administrative director, the highest-ranking Vethkai on the installation, a being called Velthon, who she had met exactly once at a mandatory orientation briefing 22 months ago. It was not a request to meet. It was a request to transfer. She would be reassigned to the station's Advanced Systems Integration Division, effective in 48 hours, with a significant increase in resource access, lab space, and, this was the phrase that caught her attention, material autonomy. She read the message 3 times. Then she read the clause she had initially skimmed. In exchange for collaboration rights on all technical innovations produced during the period of assignment. She understood then what had happened. She had done something the Vethkai had not expected a human to do. Not because they thought humans were unintelligent, they didn't, quite, but because they had a category for humans and humans occupied it neatly. Biological workers, competent within their specifications, valued for organic intuition in situations that resisted algorithmic solution. They were not, in the Vethkai institutional understanding, inventors. They were not people who looked at a clinical failure and saw an engineering opportunity. They were not people who quietly, without complaint or ceremony, made themselves better. She accepted the transfer. The Advanced Systems Integration Lab was larger than anything she'd had access to before. It had fabricators capable of working in materials she'd only read about. Adaptive polymers, neuroreactive alloys, conductive lattice structures that could be tuned to specific bioelectric frequencies. She spent the first week simply cataloging what was available. She spent the second week building. She had been thinking for a long time about her right hand. It was still biological, still original equipment, and she had noticed, since the modification of her left, that it was consistently slower. Not dramatically, milliseconds, fractions of degrees in grip precision, but she noticed. She had always noticed these things. She had the kind of mind that kept a running count of inefficiencies the way other people kept track of debts. She scheduled the surgery herself. Dr. Ari, the Vethkai medical officer assigned to the integration division, spent 15 minutes trying to talk her out of it in the careful, color-modulated way the Vethkai had of indicating deep concern without breaching professional neutrality. She listened patiently. She acknowledged all of the points raised. She explained that she had already built the replacement, already tested it across 400 simulated task cycles, and already calibrated the neural interface to her own nervous system's specific frequency signature. Dr. Ari's filaments went a long, slow gray. She had learned to recognize this one. It was the color the Vethkai turned when they had run out of counter-arguments. Waking up from that surgery, she flexed both hands simultaneously and watched the ceiling, and felt something she didn't have an easy word for. Not satisfaction. Satisfaction was too mild, too finished. This was more like the sensation of a calculation resolving, the moment when all the variables collapsed into a single clean answer and you could see it, whole and exact, sitting there waiting. She was becoming a more precise version of herself. She found this entirely reasonable. What she didn't find reasonable was the meeting she was called to 3 months later. Velthon was there. The director's filaments were a steady, formal gold, the color of official register, of things being stated for the record. 2 other Vethkai she didn't recognize were present, their color language muted in the way that, she had learned, indicated either discipline or authority. A wall display showed schematics. Her schematics, enlarged, annotated, connected by lines to Vethkai text she couldn't read fast enough to fully parse, but whose diagrams she recognized immediately, because they were her hands, her interface protocols, her haptic architecture, and they had been fitted onto something else entirely. The schematic on the wall showed a Vethkai combat frame, one of the autonomous enforcement units used for border security, for crowd suppression. For the particular category of problems, the Vethkai administration preferred to solve through systems rather than judgment. Her prosthetic architecture had been grafted onto it, her neural interface protocols, rewritten for synthetic neural analogs, her haptic sensitivity layers, modified for weapons calibration. You have made significant contributions to our understanding of biometric integration, Velthon said. The translator gave the words a smooth, measured quality that did not communicate tone. She had to watch the filaments, and the filaments were gold and perfectly still. She understood that she was being told something that was not, strictly speaking, presented as a choice. This is a military application, she said. This is an infrastructure protection application, Velthon said. The distinction is one I understand, she said, and reject. Gold flickers, fast. She had not seen that particular pattern before. She thought it might be surprise, or the Vethkai word for the category of being surprised by something small. She was not small. She had 2 hands built from her own design, and she understood now what the material autonomy clause had actually meant. She had signed away the right to refuse. She had done it because she hadn't thought it would matter. Because she had imagined, in the uncomplicated way of someone who thinks primarily in systems, that the application of her work would be obvious, medical, functional, the kind of engineering that made things work better for the beings using them. She had not thought about the beings on the other end. I require access to my lab, she said, to complete the current project phase. Velthon considered this. The gold steadied. That is appropriate, it said. She was escorted back by one of the unnamed Vethkai. This one she had a name for now. She'd asked for it in the hallway, casually, the way you ask for a word in a language you're learning. Kavth. Its filaments ran a quiet, steady blue that she associated with professionalism, or perhaps with the particular quality of attention that was not quite comfort, but was close to it. It had been assigned to her as a liaison, she understood. A pleasant word for a supervision function. She worked in the lab for 6 days. Kavath was always nearby, occasionally asking questions about her work with what she thought was genuine interest. It had started doing this in the 2nd week after the transfer, and she had answered honestly. She found, to her occasional irritation, that she had come to like Kavth in the way you come to like a well-calibrated instrument that keeps accurate time. Kavath was precise, curious, and had the Vethkai quality of listening with the whole body, filaments attentive, that she found unexpectedly easy to be around. This made what she was doing harder, and she was going to do it anyway. On the 6th day, she told Kavath that she needed to test the new limb interface under high-load conditions and asked for access to the deep maintenance corridors beneath the fabrication floor, where the station's primary power coupling ran. Kavath checked the access manifest, confirmed her clearance, and accompanied her down. The deep corridors were everything the upper labs weren't. Low-ceilinged, service-worn, smelling of ozone and the particular metallic warmth of systems running at capacity. She liked them. She had always liked the honest utilitarian spaces of working infrastructure, the places that existed purely to keep other things running. She navigated 3 junctions from memory. She had memorized the maintenance schematics in her 2nd week at the lab, before she'd known why she might need them. She stopped at the primary coupling junction. I need to access the secondary relay panel, she said, and pointed to the access cover 12 feet up the far wall. A climb in the low lighting, with the coupling running close. Kavath assessed this, its filaments shifting through several colors she couldn't entirely read, and climbed up beside her to observe. She had the relay cover off in 40 seconds. Her right hand, her original, biological right hand, the one she had kept, found the specific connection point she'd spent 3 nights locating in the schematics. Her left hand, the precision instrument, held the modified transmitter she'd built over 6 days, disguised as a calibration tool. Kavath's filaments went rapid white. It had understood. The interface protocols I designed can't be replicated without the source architecture, she said, without looking at it. Her voice was level. She found in this moment that she was not afraid, which was either admirable or alarming, and she didn't have time to determine which. The source architecture is neuroreactive. It's keyed to my bioelectric signature. Any attempt to run it on a synthetic analog without my active calibration will produce cascade desynchronization in approximately 37 minutes at full load. I have a transmitter here that will broadcast that desynchronization signal to every unit running my interface protocols on this station. A pause. Kaveth was very still. That will damage 12 infrastructure systems, it said. Yes, I know. I designed them around the single-point failure so it's recoverable. I estimated 49 hours to full restoration with the maintenance staff you have. I've written the repair sequence. She reached into her chest pocket, moving carefully, precisely, in the way Kaveth had learned she always moved, and took out a data chip and set it on the junction housing between them. It's on there. Also on there is a full technical documentation packet explaining exactly what I did and why the military application will never work without either my active cooperation or a complete redesign from different principles. Velthon should read the section on neural frequency harmonics. It's not long. Kavth's filaments were doing something she hadn't seen before. A cycling pattern, fast and complex. Colors layering over each other in a way that looked less like emotion and more like thought. She waited. You will be remanded, it said. Your contract designations, I know. There are consequences for. I know, she said again. Quiet, not impatient, just clear. I know all of that. I'm not doing this because I think it's free. I'm doing it because some things aren't for sale, and I should have been more careful about what I signed. Silence. The power coupling hummed. Somewhere deep in the station's bones, a recycler cycled on. The transmitter, Koff said. You have not activated it. She looked at it. It was right. She was holding it, her modified, precision left hand steady, the activation contact sitting under her thumb. She had not pressed it. I'm giving you the choice, she said. Take me to Velthon. Let me make the case directly. Or I activate it, the 12 systems go down, and this station spends the next 49 hours doing repairs instead of arming anything. She paused. I'd rather make the case. I think it's a better argument than a power outage. But I'll do what I have to. Kavth was quiet for a very long time. Its filaments settled slowly into a color she recognized, the blue of professional attention, clean, steady, the color of a well-calibrated instrument. The director, it said, does not enjoy being surprised. Nobody does, she said. But it's a shorter meeting if I'm not being escorted by security when I arrive. The walk to Velthon's administrative level took 11 minutes. She spent it thinking, with the precise and slightly obsessive attention she gave all engineering problems, about the argument she was about to make. She had spent 6 days building the transmitter. She had spent 4 of those 6 nights building the argument. The transmitter was the contingency. The argument was the plan. She had learned something in 22 months aboard this station about the way the Vethkai thought. They were not cruel, they were categorical. The category of human worker had not included technical innovator, and so her innovations had been processed through the nearest available category, which was corporate asset, which had a clear and well-established protocol for military application. This was not malice. It was the institutional logic of a species that had evolved over a very long time into a hierarchy of extraordinary stability. Stability required categories. Categories required clarity. Clarity required that things sit where they were put and not wander into new classifications uninvited. She supposed, an invitation violator by nature. It wasn't something she'd chosen. It was simply what she was. Velthon received her in the formal office, the full administrative register, gold filaments, the 2 unnamed officials in their muted professional palette. Kavath stood at the door. She stood in the center of the room. She explained the cascade desynchronization in 3 sentences. She explained the data chip in 2. She set it on the director's desk without ceremony. Then she said, I'm not asking to void the contract. I understand I owe your administration a debt for the resources I've used and the materials I've consumed. I'll honor that debt. I'll work. I'll build things. She paused. But not weapons. Not because I have a philosophical objection to your military requirements. I don't know enough about your military requirements to have one. Because the specific thing I build requires me to want it to work well. And if I'm building something to hurt people, I won't want it to work well. I'll want it to fail, and it will fail because I'll have built the failure in at the start, and neither of us will know it until a critical moment when it matters, and that's not a good outcome for anyone. The room was very still. That, she said, is an engineering argument, not an ethical one, though it happens to produce the same answer. Velthon's filaments moved through 3 colors she could track, and several she couldn't. The 2 unnamed officials were doing something with their own color language that was either consultation or disagreement, or both. Kaveth at the door was the steady blue again. The director spoke. What is the nature of the work you propose instead? Medical, she said immediately. Prosthetics. The interface architecture I developed has applications for every species with a peripheral nervous system and tissue loss from injury or disease. Not just Vethkai. Not just humans. You have 47 species represented on this station. I've read the medical intake records for the past 18 months. 11% of non-critical injuries result in functional impairment that your current prosthetic options don't adequately address. She had thought about this number a lot. She had thought about the beings those numbers represented. I can do better than the current options. I already have, twice. I'd like to keep doing it. Another long silence. She waited in it, without anxiety. She had done the calculation. Either the argument worked or it didn't, and if it didn't, the transmitter was still in her left hand, and the data chip was on the desk, and 49 hours of repair was a recoverable failure. She had designed it that way. She thought briefly about her father's kitchen appliances, about the motors inside, about the way a system, once you understood it completely, always told you exactly where it was most likely to break. She thought about the hand she'd lost in Bay 12, the clean line of the cauterization, the absence of the kind of panic that would have helped nothing. She thought about the 9 days she'd spent rebuilding it, about waking up from the second surgery and flexing both hands and watching the ceiling. She was a more precise version of herself than she had been 22 months ago. She intended to keep going. The contract terms, Velthon said, would require restructuring. Yes, she said. I've drafted a proposal. It's also on the data chip. A pause that might have been amusement or exasperation, and possibly both. You anticipated this outcome, the director said. I anticipated several outcomes, she said honestly. I tried to prepare for all of them. This is the one I wanted. The formal gold of the filaments shifted very slightly toward a warmer register, amber, but not the alarm amber she'd first seen at the processor bay. Something quieter than that. Something in the category of reassessment which she had learned was the Vethkai way of saying, you are not what we put you down as. She had been waiting 22 months to be filed in the right category. She was willing to wait a little longer for the paperwork. Kaveth walked her back to the lab. They were quiet for most of the way, and she found the quiet comfortable, which was not something she'd ever said about silences with beings whose nervous systems she hadn't studied. At the junction of the third corridor, she stopped and looked at the access cover she'd opened 6 days ago, still closed now, the relay undisturbed. You never actually used it, Kaveth said. No, she said. You could not have known I would accompany you to the director. No. Then the transmitter was a genuine contingency, not a display. She thought about this. I build genuine contingencies, she said. A contingency that doesn't function isn't a contingency. It's a bluff. She paused. I don't bluff. It's imprecise. Kaveth's filaments shifted through a pattern she recognized now. The complex cycling thought color, fast and layered, that she'd first seen in the maintenance corridor when it had understood what she was doing. She had come to associate it with the moment of recalibration, when a new piece of information was being processed against existing categories and found to require a new one entirely. You are a very strange human, Kaveth said. I'm a very normal engineer, she said. She went back to the lab. She had 18 proposals for prosthetic improvements, 11 species medical specifications to review, and a neural interface protocol that needed to be adapted for 3 different nervous system architectures she'd identified in the intake records. She had materials and space and the particular quality of problem in front of her that she had always found most satisfying, a problem that was large, specific, and useful. She sat down. She put both hands on the workbench, left and right, matched, precise, the biological and the engineered sitting side by side without hierarchy, and pulled up the first specification. The work was better than the hand she'd lost. It was better than what they'd offered her. It was better than what she'd had before. She had made it that way. She intended to keep making it that way. Whatever the Vethkai chose to file that under was their business. She already knew what she called it. She called it human. 3 months later, in the station's medical bay, a Rethon dock worker, 6-limbed, secondary arm damaged beyond Vethkai prosthetic compatibility, flexed a new limb for the first time and went very still. Then it made a sound she didn't have a word for in any language she spoke, and she asked the translator to render it as best it could. The nearest approximation, the device told her, was, the thing that was missing is here now. She thought about that for a while, turning it over with the same focused attention she gave all interesting problems. Then she went back to work.